Hi, John Grenham here again. This is one of the videos in the sub-series about Irish church records. And today's talk is going to be about Irish Methodist records. Very brief and to the point, so let's get straight onto the site. Okay, the most of what I'm going to be saying is here in the free browse section under church records. So I'm going to be talking about the Methodist records. The most important thing about Methodism is that it started off as a movement within the Anglican Church, the Church of Ireland, the Church of England, rather than a separate schismatic church itself. It was a movement within the church in the 18th century. John Wesley, he's now revered as the founder of Methodism, but he was the one who started these great meetings and preaching to the meetings. And the upshot is that for the first decades of Methodism, all of the records of Methodists are found in the records of the Anglican Church. So in Ireland, that's the Church of Ireland. After 1816, the movement split, and some people remained part of the Church of Ireland, at least as far as sacramental records are concerned, and others went on to form a separate communion. So the primitive Methodists, oddly enough, were the ones who stayed within the Church of Ireland, and the Wesleyan Methodists were the ones who authorized their own ministers to perform baptisms and communions. Again, marriages until the 1844, only marriages carried out by the Church of Ireland were supposed to be valid. I mean, it was like many Irish laws, it was more honoured in the breach than in the observance. But so Methodist marriages until 1844 are almost all to be found in Church of Ireland records as well. Then the split between the primitive and the Wesleyan Methodists continued until 1878. After then, they unified as a separate church outside the Anglican Church. So it's really only after 1878 that you have unambiguously Methodist records of baptisms, marriages, and burials. Okay. So that's the first thing. So if you're looking for Methodist, if you have Methodist ancestors, you need to be looking in Church of Ireland records as well as in Methodist records. That's just as a general rule of thumb. If you're looking at specifically Methodist records, there are a couple of large problems. The biggest one is that the Methodism never adopted a parochial system. So it was never a geographical area that was served by Methodist ministers. They were preachers on a circuit, and they took the records with them as they went on their circuit from town to town, preaching in different meeting halls in different towns. So it retained its character as a movement rather than an institutional church, as it were. One of the problems about the preachers moving around, the ministers moving around, is that they took the records with them, and when they moved from one circuit, as it was known, to another, they very often took the records with them. So finding Methodist records can be a real pain. Okay. The best collection of Methodist records is in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, which became, particularly after 1922, became the de facto record institution for non-Catholic records. Even Methodists much further south tended to look to Belfast as their natural home rather than to Dublin, and they, for obvious reasons, they were dead right. But in any case, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland microfilmed, collected the Methodist records, and their parish register index. They're not quite parishes, but the Methodist records are included in that, and they have lots and lots of microfilms of them, as well as for all areas in Northern Ireland now, all areas in historic Ulster, which includes the three counties of Donegal, Cavan, and Monaghan, and also for lots of areas further south, for Limerick and Bandon and so on. If you're trying to track down a particular preacher because the preacher tends to be the key to the records rather than the circuit. There is Pettigrew and Oulton's directories, give the lists of Methodist preachers and their stations. So Pettigrew and Oulton and Thom's directories, they're called Dublin directories, but they cover all the clergy all throughout the country. So they will give you the names of the clergymen, where they were stationed from about 1835 on. Now, once you have the names, then how do you find out where they went? Okay, there is Hill's alphabetical arrangement of all the Wesleyan Methodist ministers, gives the postings of every Methodist minister in the British Isles, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland as it was, in 1857. So that's a pretty good jumping off spot as well. Also, MethodistHistoryIreland.org is a superb website. It is, I've only touched on the surface of the kinds of records that Methodism produced and some of the difficulties in getting at them. These are people who live it every day and who have faced all these problems already. If you have Methodist ancestors, you need to look at this site very carefully. Okay, I hope I've given you a brief introduction to researching Methodist ancestors. They were a small minority in Ireland for most of their history, but they punched above their weight. They had more influence, and they spread quite widely throughout the country as well. There were Methodist meeting houses in lots of areas where they no longer exist. So you need to think back into the 19th century. But I hope I've given you enough to get you started at least. Okay, happy hunting.